Voi dovete impedire che un pugno di ruffiani e di frodatori riesca a imbrattare l'Italia. Tutte le azioni necessarie assolva la legge di Roma.
E l'arte è la più nobile delle imprese.
E qui riuscì a rivedere le stelle.
Le storie e le azioni degli uomini eccellenti.
Dobbiamo meritarcela, la storia che ci è capitata. Qualcuno ce l'ha pagata. Non fu gratis.
E il naufragare è dolce in questo mare.
Tanto maggiori sono gli ostacoli e tanto più precisi di vista deve essere la nostra volontà di superarli.
Io direi che è stato creato un grande patrimonio che appartiene alla collettività nazionale, appartiene a tutti gli italiani.
The following is a reading of Italian Fascism, an Economic Historical Summary by Zoltanous H.N. Italian fascism and the history around it involves a series of policies, ideas, and actions that, if seen superficially, can come off as contradictory and irrational. But when analyzed in proper depth, we can see a dialectical application of developmental economics. Italian fascism, for this reason, is far more difficult to comprehend, given that the regime itself needs not only historical context to be comprehended, but it also needs to be seen in distinct periods in which it could be divided. This also adds more nuance to contradictory statements made by Mussolini regarding capitalism. Therefore, to fully understand this, what were these distinct periods? They were as follows. First, the heroic capitalism period, 1922 to 1932. From the start, Mussolini was faced with syndicalists like Alceste de Ambris and unionists like Edmondo Rossoni in one camp, while being faced with pro-capitalists like Filippo Marianetti and traditionalists like Emanuele III in the other camp. Here you would find what Mussolini dubbed as heroic capitalism. This period can be compared to the new economic policy proposed by Vladimir Lenin under the USSR. This was the attempt of fascist Italy at industrializing. Despite its backwardness in the economic field, it would seek to modernize Italy, generate a good amount of industry, and through it, get to a new field of exploration for its economic goals, which were envisioned since the very early manifestos from the Italian movement. This is the creation of an integral, organic, corporate total society. That is to say, this period was nothing else but a transitional period between the old Italian economic system and the beginning of the fascistization of the Italian economy. Corporatism is understood by Italian fascism as seeing society as a corpus. The body of society is divided by several articulations that belong to the body, making it work if set together and properly coordinated to make such an entity be able to function. In a fascist society, society must be divided in branches which complement its functioning, and once put together and coordinated by the state, it works in an organic way to constantly improve the soul and strength of the body. The second period is known as the Corporatist period, which lasted from 1932 to 1943. This period could be summarized as the proper beginning of the fascist economy to a degree. According to Mussolini, this wasn't the objective, but only the beginning of the Italian advance towards the complete revolutionary corporatist society, which would eventually happen, in a forceful manner, during 1943 to 1945. This period was characterized by the constant intervention of reactionary and monarchist forces inside the economy to make its way for their own benefit. It was an issue that later on would be recognized by Mussolini himself. Quote, 20 years of experience taught fascism that the state cannot limit mediation functions between classes because the substantial strength of the capitalist class is able to transform inoperative legal equity upon which equality was preached upon. These higher forces allowed the capitalist class to dominate and turn it to their advantage in every state action. End quote. During this period, Italian society and its productive forces would be divided into corporations, in which the state would mediate the interests of both the capitalist and the proletariat class, keeping an eye on both of them, especially the first one, considering they had to lead them around in order to fulfill the amount of social demands Italian fascism was seeking, and to direct them towards goals of national interest. Big industry was regulated under the overview of the state, which made sure it couldn't surpass certain limits, and was working on an ethical basis likable to fascism, which, as stated before, it wouldn't fully work as expected by the fascist leaders of the time. The third period is known as the State Socialist period, lasting from 1943 to 1945. During this period, fascism got freed from many forces inside the government that, in one way or another, were interfering in the actions of the state, in the benefits of certain high-class elements, and limiting the amount of reforms Mussolini was able to consolidate, which has been recorded by several historians specialized on that period of Italian history. It is in this way in which Mussolini allies himself with a higher number of left-wing fascists, among them the former friend of Lenin, Nicola Bombaci, who would take a big role in the reforms of the government aimed at the complete socialization of the economy, turning the control of industry to a more worker-oriented program as the size of the industry and of profit grew. This program aimed for a self-gestion type of economy in which the state would still have a role in directing it and ensuring welfare for its citizens. The final action could be seen as fascism trying to bring back support and regretting its previous actions, but as understood by historians, this was nothing but the legitimate progress of fascism from the very beginning. Rutilo Sermonti, in On Socialization from Europa magazine, provides much more context to the development of fascist economic periods. Quote, "The fundamental canon of the fascist revolution was that of gradualism, both so as not to provoke a tragic crisis and because truly profound innovations cannot be made by striking left and right, but only allowing the popular forma mentis to evolve in the desired direction. Whoever speaks of a breakdown, or of substantial change, or of regret, or even of a return to the origins is unknown, can only do so due to a lack of information, superficiality, or taking sides. It is clear that the socialization of 1944 is nothing more than pure and distilled corporatism, and corporatism is synonymous with fascism. In this sense, the path to socialization had different progressive stages. First phase, trade union law, the law of April 3rd, 1926, number 563. With this law, trade union associations, both employers and workers, were entrusted with the delicate public function of establishing with legislative effect the conditions of work and remuneration that were the object of secular conflict. Second phase, Carta del Lavoro, published on April 21st of 1927 as a pragmatic declaration of the PNF and converted into a state law 13 years later. It's important because it solemnly sanctions that both work in all its forms and private initiative in the field of production are national duties and functions that must be regulated and supervised by the state. Labor is, therefore, an instrument of the nation, as well as capital, not an instrument of capital. Third phase, corporations. Fundamental Law of February 3rd, 1934, number 136. They were organs of the state established by productive branches and guardians of their demands. They were made up equally of representatives of trade union associations as well as the two parties interested in each branch. Therefore, the workers' representatives thus formulated, together with the business community, the production directives that companies had to obey. The exaltation and responsibility of the work factor had taken a good leap forward. Fourth phase, the reform of political representation. The law of January 19th of 1939, number 129. This was the decisive move to organic representation, that is, by functions and not by unqualified generic consensus. For the problem that concerns us, the national councillors, who replaced the deputies, were half members of the National Council of Corporations. It means that the workers' representatives sat as such in the highest legislative body. Thus, in public law, any subordination of work to capital was definitely abolished. Fifth phase, the reform of the civil law codes of 1940, the law of January 3rd, 1941, number 14. It is truly unique that none of the commentators refer to it, as if the idea of socialization was a cricket that jumped at Mussolini's head as he flew out of Campo Imperatores alongside Otto Skorzeny. However, in that code there was already socialization. There we find the responsibility of the employer, or who represents him if he is anonymous, defined as head of the company and not owner or employer. There we find the responsibility of the employer to the state for his management of the company." End quote.
Noi crediamo che l'Italia, sotto la guida del Littorio, inquadrata in tutte le sue formazioni rivoluzionarie, attingerà i suoi destini, arriverà al benessere, alla potenza e alla gloria.
Conclusions. The complexity of the topic has shown that Italian fascism was not merely a straightforward dictatorship of a single man. What fascism actually went through was the reform of Italian society gradually. In this true essence, Italian fascism, on the state level, is an application of dialectics. On January the 24th of 1943, Giovanni Gentile delivered a speech in Rome asking Italian workers to resist the Anglo-Americans. He expressly addressed leftist circles by presenting fascism as, quote, "an order of justice founded upon the principle that the only value is work," end quote. And Gentile specified, quote, "whoever speaks of communism in Italy today is an impatient corporatist," end quote. This revelation was found in the reality of fascist economy. Mussolini always insisted that fascism was the only form of socialism appropriate to the proletarian nations of the 20th century, such as Italy. He always argued that it was the only applicable version of socialism in reality. The original intention was always socialism, and focused on development for social needs, adding to the clarity of the misconceptions of those who twist reality. A. James Gregor makes this argument in Italian Fascism and Developmental Dictatorship. Fascism, in essence, was a practical application of Marxism, as Gentile would argue, via Sorelian praxis, leading to a new society of producers. Fascism was an attempt to overturn Anglo-American capitalist hegemony. It was a dialectical application of productive forces for a society of abundance, and it was the attempt to create a society that understood the scientific application of historical nuances and material reality, meaning that the socialism of fascism is a process of becoming.
Scendiamo in campo contro le democrazie plutocratiche e reazionarie dell'Occidente. Popolo italiano!